from the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Morrow, and with me, as always, is Mike Walsh. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Jen. How are you?
I'm
exhausted.
Great.
Exhausted. You're exhausted. I know.
All right,
you're exhausted.
I am exhausted.
Because I'm exhausted too.
You're exhausted too, right? Yeah.
That's right. Easter is the time in the diocesan life where I realize I'm going to take a nap for about 50 days. Which, of course, is not true because we have an ordination to plan and a whole bunch of other stuff coming up and a Eucharistic revival to focus on. But man, it was a great Holy Week, but I am worn out.
I am too. And, I thought I got enough sleep on like Sunday night and Monday, but every day I tried to get up early this week. Not happened. It has not happened once.
No. I was driving in this morning and saw you sneaking into the building, and I was quite late. So I know you were late. Yeah. No. It's yeah. But I'll tell you this: it was a great week. Just to sort of recap it for our listeners. It was a standing room only crowd at Palm Sunday in Camden, and a beautiful Holy Thursday Mass in Vinelands. Wonderful Good Friday service in Northfield, New Jersey. And then in my home parish, we had the Easter Vigil, which was actually Bishop has said repeatedly to me and to others what a great Easter Vigil was at the parish of St. Bridget University Parish, rather, in Glassboro, just because there were so many young people being brought into the church because the Campus Catholic Ministry program there is just so good. And then we finished off on Easter Sunday in St. Charles Borromeo in Sicklerville. And that was another standing room only crowd. And actually I don't get to spend much time at that parish. It is a very enthusiastic parish. That was a great way to finish off my Easter Sunday. Yeah.
I love the outfits on Easter Sunday. Like when I'm looking at the pictures that you took there, and the hats, the beautiful hats and the beautiful Easter dresses. The non-journalist girl part of me loves that part. I love hats. So I love seeing all the hats. But, going back to Easter Vigil, there were 8 young people who came into the church that night and received the sacraments. And I got to speak to 3 or 4 of them. And just what wonderful, deep, theological young adults that I got to speak with. When we were talking about their faith journey and how they came to the church, it wasn't a part of it was, of course, the spiritual and how they've been called spiritually. But I was honestly moved by how they were talking also about how they had been called theologically to the church. And one young man I had spoken with, he said that he wanted some of his questions answered about the Catholic Church. And that's why he even started looking into it. And then I asked him, well, what kind of questions? And he's like, the papacy and apostolic succession. And I was like, holy cow, like that's not something you hear come out of somebody's mouth who's only 20. So just a great weekend. I got to out to some new parishes I hadn't been to before, met some new pastors. And I also went to my first Chrism Mass, which was also very beautiful during the week.
That shocks me that 5 years in the wonderful and awesome Diocese of Trenton, you had never had an opportunity to attend a Chrism Mass before.
Oh, I had the opportunity. It was just that usually somebody else covered it, and with other movements during the Holy Week that I was usually on call for, I always just took a step back on that one and let the experts cover it. So, but it was great. I loved Chrism Mass, and I got to meet a lot of other new priests because there were over 150 priests, 50 deacons, and more religious. So. It was all in all, it was a great week. We're exhausted, but it was worth every minute of it.
It was. And, just as a reminder to our good spiritual listeners that I was having a conversation with our Vicar General earlier this week, and we were talking about the Easter Vigil. And he put his I wish people would remember that the Easter Vigil is literally the most important Mass in the Catholic calendar. It's the one that, every Catholic should strive to attend because it's, in many ways, the birth of the church happens in that Mass. And it's the rebirth for many people coming to the church for the first time. So it's this glorious, and it's an epic It's an epic mass. As a matter of fact, he was explaining to me that there are churches that have been built with that mass in mind alone, because it starts with the bonfire outside, which should be a big, huge experience. That it actually goes back to the theory or the history of that actually goes back to Roman times, and even their beliefs on the importance of fire and its life-bringing nature, things like that. Anyway, I hope next year you will all consider going to our listeners. That is, will all consider going to the Easter Vigil Mass, because it's amazing. It's wonderful. So that's
it was really also. What I was going to say, I don't even know if you realized, because you were photographing the Easter Vigil Mass while I was writing, and it was during those early readings for the first reader, by the way, who did a very lovely job reading, and it was the creation, and then all of a sudden, like right in the middle of those readings of the creation, this huge bolt of thunder and lightning went off, and because all of the because it was storming that night a little bit. And because you have stained glass windows all at the top of that church, like you could see it all lighting up. And I just leaned over and I was thinking, "Oh, that was perfect timing. Good one, Lord."
Well, that's.
But it was very nice to spend the Easter Vigil in your parish.
Well, we were happy you could spend it with us. So for this podcast, that's our the Catholic Church is both good works and good faith and good deeds. So that was our faith portion of the podcast. Now we're going to get into some of the good deeds portion of the podcast with a group you've worked with far more than me, actually. I have to say I've done very little. I've had very little interaction with CRS, with the exception of the work we've done with the Rice Bowl at the diocesan level. But you've actually interacted with Catholic Relief Services quite a bit more in your time, particularly when you were back in Trenton, right?
Yes. I was very fortunate to be contacted by Catholic Relief Services during my work with the Trenton Diocese. And for the last 1.5 years, have just gotten to know more of their staff and volunteers. So considering we just came to the end of Lent and Rice Bowl and so many things going on in the world that CRS is part of, we thought it would be great to invite our Catholic Relief Service friends onto the podcast, and they graciously agreed. So I'm going to introduce them. We have Jessica Morrell, Community Engagement Manager with Catholic Relief Services. And then we also have Tom Hollywood, who is also Community Engagement Manager with Catholic Relief Services. So Tom and Jessica, welcome.
Hi, Jen. Hi. Thanks so much for having us.
Hi, Jen and Mike. Great to be here with you today.
Well, thanks for joining. So we have a good show here that we just kind of wanted to let our listeners know exactly what it is that Catholic Relief Services does on the national, international, and local level, and then talk about a little bit how everybody can get involved in one way or another and why that might be important. So thanks for being on. So why don't we start a little bit about how you both got involved with CRS and why you wanted to be involved in it.
All right. Thanks, Jen. I'll go first. Again, thanks so much for having us. My name is Jessica Morrell, and as you said, I'm a community engagement manager. I'm fairly new to CRS. I just started this November, and I felt called to working at CRS because I started, as you did, Jen, I started as a partner with CRS. I worked in campus ministry for 14.5 years at a local university. So I have to say congrats to all the new students at St. Bridget's University Parish from the Easter Vigil. That's wonderful to hear and so exciting. So welcome to the church. And that's just awesome. But I worked as a campus minister and was also contacted by CRS and developed a student group there. We were called Student Ambassadors at the time, and we evolved into a CRS chapter, which I'll tell you a little more about that. And through my work with CRS, I got invited to a university delegation trip to Rwanda to actually witness the work that CRS does that Tom's going to tell us so much about. I don't want to take that from him, but I was so inspired by seeing the work overseas and really felt called to come back here to the States and share more of that, because truly the work overseas that we're going to be telling you about is not possible without the partners, the volunteers, and all the passionate people here in the States. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I guess, CRS has always been around as far as I can remember. When I got out of college, I graduated from Stonehill College. I went on a volunteer experience with Cabrini Mission Corps related to Cabrini University down in Pennsylvania. And I was in Argentina and Ethiopia with them. And then I went on to work with another Catholic organization, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. And CRS was just always in that conversation. But formally, I really started pursuing a career with CRS in 2006. So I've been with CRS just about 15 years. I started off as a fellow, which is a great entry point into grooming future managers and leaders of CRS. And I began that in Peru. And then I went to Malawi, Sudan, and then back over to Latin America. And I was based in Ecuador, but I was serving and I was responsible for 7 other countries within South America for CRS's responses and work and engagement with partners. And then finally, I wrapped up this portion of my overseas career in Ethiopia. And I just returned to the US to live back here permanently as of November of last year. So I'm 6 months into this community engagement manager position and looking at CRS on the other side after doing so much work on the relief and development front.
Wow. So you have 2 real different perspectives then of CRS.
Yeah, I do. I can really speak to, fortunately, I had the privilege, like I said, to work in those 5 countries, 2 different continents. But yeah, I can really speak to the work that's done at that frontline level where CRS's work is so important and meaningful.
So I think a lot of people, I'll just speak for myself anyway. I remember, when I would, of course, read articles about CRS or was, interested in perhaps taking part, you were saying, Jessica, those local chapters we'll talk about later. I always was under the impression that CRS was mainly overseas work. But the more I've gotten involved with CRS, I realize it's both. It's national, it's local, it's international. Can you talk a little bit, Tom, about your international work and what you've seen and on the ground?
Yeah, I guess, Jen, what I would say, and I hope that this resonates with your audience, is that I think that CRS is one of those best kept secrets within the Catholic Church, within the U.S. constituents. And I think also, too, it's something that U.S. Catholics should be very proud of. And I say that because Catholic Relief Services is one of the largest and one of the premier international relief and development agencies. So when we say relief, that means that CRS has a presence, responds, and works to alleviate pain and suffering when it comes to natural disasters. So the relief aspect, hurricanes, earthquakes, landslides, conflict. Right now, what we're seeing in Ukraine, I think U.S. Catholics need to know that CRS is there, supporting partners and trying to alleviate a lot of that pain and suffering that I just mentioned. But also on the other side is development. And the development aspect is really anchored in trying to get at the root causes of poverty, right? It's not something that you can oversimplify. These are problems that are entrenched in societies for a variety of different reasons. They're complex. And CRS shows its commitment to always be with those that are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the most in need. And I think it also really stems from the base of CRS, which is Catholic social teaching. That's our playbook. This option for the poor, solidarity, subsidiarity, the list goes on. And those principles aren't just kind of frivolous, but those are the ones that guide our work day in and day out. So CRS, we work in about 110 countries. It fluctuates a little bit based on some of the emergency relief interventions that are going on in the world. We have a portfolio of about 190 million clients. So we are attending to a high number of those that are in need, unfortunately. And CRS works in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and now also very much focused on Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So the footprint of CRS is something that really separates it and puts it in a very distinguishable category, because when you have this sort of presence, that means that the work that you see is very much results-based. And it's moving the needle so that the pain and the suffering is reduced time and time again. So anyway, I can go on a lot more, but that's just a little bit of an intro.
Well, I think it's a great intro, and you were talking about that Catholic social teaching specifically,
Right.
and that really goes into what spurs in my mind right away is Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical on the care for our common home. And I remember when I read that, how many topics that he was speaking about that go into exactly what you're talking about, because we can talk about, of course, disaster relief, but we're also talking about sustainability for people who don't have access to healthcare, clean water, jobs. So, like you said, I feel like Catholic CRS specifically really touches on that Catholic social teaching, what we're all called to do.
Yeah, and our leadership comes from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, right? We are a branch of the USCCB. Mm-hmm. The history stems back from 1943 of addressing the refugee crisis during World War II. And exactly what you're saying, Jen, about the traditions, the legacies, the customs of the U.S. Catholic Church to say, I need to respond. This is wrong. I need to try and make it right. And I want to work with those who are in need, not for, because that's where the solidarity comes into play. But just one quick reference to Laudato Si, and it was just because it was on my mind yesterday. When you mentioned clean water, I think it's very apropos. In Laudato Si, as your audience probably knows better than I do, and I'm sure you and Mike can also speak to it at a high degree of expertise. But in Laudato Si, water, just water, is mentioned 47 times. So for CRS, Laudato Si is another mandate to focus on the common good, to address climate change. And because of that mandate, CRS uses that as a premise to develop a new water security strategy that will carry out our interventions until 2030. So again, it's that prism to say, Laudato Si has identified water as one of those core needs and absolutely is spot on correct on what we see time and time again. The access, the availability of clean water is particularly troublesome. And now CRS has a strategy, always had a strategy, but it's been revamped, refocused because of Laudato Si. And now we're implementing that strategy to increase access to clean water.
That's beautiful. I love it when we can read something and then put that into practice. So the fact that you have a goal with an end date, I don't know, I love it. Great job.
Yeah, and that's something that we could talk about in more details, but it's to get the audience and to get others in the U.S. to realize that these are just not normal occurrences. The access to water, electricity, schools, financial institutions, hospitals, the list goes on and on. So when you don't have these basic needs, as I mentioned earlier about what's entrenching those or what keeps people from becoming less poor, it's when you have a lot of these obstacles. And when you don't have clean water, it creates this multiplier of negative effects that really impede vulnerable communities to progress.
Mm-hmm. There's that hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. I mean, clean water, for example, what it just does for girls' education, right? Many young girls in the developing world do not go to school because their primary responsibility is to walk for miles to fetch for clean water at a water point that they're not sure if it's going to work or not, and then to carry back that water, usually with donkey carts. And that's something that takes hours. And because of that commitment, because of that need, they miss out on going to school. So that automatically sets them back and reaching their, that dignity and their full potential. So water, not only do you have the implications or the negative impact on health and nutrition because it's not readily available, but look what it does to a young girl's life in their aspirations or how they want to advance or how they want to be educated. It really just sets them back.
So we've been talking a lot about their clean water access. And, actually that reminds me real quick before I jump into the next question. I was speaking with somebody the other day and one of our parishes in the Diocese of Camden is raising money for cost clean water and lighting in Haiti. And I was asking about the lighting specifically. And it was because what you're saying as well, young boys can't go to school because they're working during the day, like you said, with the water or whatever they were doing. But then they would go to school at night, but there's no electricity. So they can't see to get from a building where the school might be back to their village. So they're not getting educated just because they have no lighting. So these things that we take for granted every single day, is what we would consider a small, something might be simple or small, is life-changing. So speaking about life-changing, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your relief work that you have done, Tom?
Yeah, again, just had the privilege and pleasure to work in a variety of different contexts. I think one example would be CRS's response to the earthquake that hit Ecuador in 2016. It was a devastating earthquake where it literally caused damage through the entire country along the coastal side of Ecuador. And, one of those things that I think separates CRS from others is our ability to respond almost immediately. So in this instance, as soon as the roads were passable, Jen, meaning that we could get our vehicles in and start assessing the damage, we were there ready to work. So we were there 2 days after the earthquake struck. And with our presence there, we were able to already engage with local officials, communities, government officials as well, to kind of see what were the immediate needs. And, CRS, what I always talk about is it's very professional and technical. Nothing is kind of done kind of like in a hodgepodge sort of way without any sort of sense of organization. So we have our tools, we have our methodologies, we know what we need to do when we do step into a community. And, for this particular instance, we identified, always in consultation with those that are most affected, but we knew that housing, so shelters, that was an immediate need, clean water, because usually what occurs after these sorts of emergencies is the threat or the risk of waterborne illnesses. Cholera, for example, is very common because of the mixing and the sanitary conditions get very poor. But then also, thirdly, psychosocial support. After a tremendous earthquake, like what hit Ecuador in 2016, there are usually hundreds, if not thousands, of tremors. And so people are shell-shocked. I mean, you could even equate it a little bit to PTSD, where the tremors bring back that initial earthquake and they start running, or they feel as though where they are now is unsafe, or that temporary shelter that they're in might collapse. So it's not only addressing the physical needs, but CRS thinks of the holistic approach. So the psychosocial, spiritual, mental interventions are equally important.
Are there religious there on the ground with you, like priests or sisters or brothers, when you talk about that?
Yeah, no, that's another great point, Jen. CRS also has a very unique model that I think you as Catholics should also be proud of, where we don't implement directly, right? It's not something where we go in like cowboys and gangbusters and we're doing anything that we want because we're kind of the Americans running the show. We always look to partner with the local Catholic Church. And the local Catholic Church usually has a social justice commission or some sort of response agency, or if not, we're looking with local dioceses and the parishes. There's some sort of local Catholic institution that is always the first priority with whom we want to partner. And then the relationship kind of builds. Sometimes in areas, it's kind of new because an emergency occurs and maybe there's not a long-standing relationship. But in other areas of a particular country, there might be a diocese that's very well versed and working with CRS, and we just then pivot to respond to an emergency that occurs. But I think that that's also something where our model already embeds the idea of sustainability, where we want to develop capacities, we want to work for and with different local Catholic institutions, but then also we want to have a transfer of skills and knowledge so that it's very much a partnership where there's a give and take and a mutuality, where they see the value of CRS and we're offering something that can continue onward.
Yeah, that's important of like you say, having the tools in place. That's one thing that's really been coming to mind in the last 2 months or so with what's been happening in Ukraine. And I know in the Diocese of Camden, Bishop Sullivan has encouraged anybody who wants to help Ukraine to go to CRS because of the like you said, the tools or the institutions that are already on the ground there that those funds can go directly to who's there. Now, I know you haven't been in Ukraine, but you do have some similar experiences during your time, I think, when we were talking earlier in Sudan. Am I correct? And maybe there's some parallels there.
Yeah, unfortunately, more often than not, there are similarities and parallels from what we see in these terrible contexts where war, conflict, and destruction is very apparent. So, yeah, in Ukraine, CRS is working hard within the country, mostly looking to expedite evacuation routes and provide just basic safety for those Ukrainians that are looking to flee. There's some other interventions going on, but it's very challenging, as you can imagine, on the Eastern Front. And then also CRS has set up a lot of different program interventions in neighboring countries where we see the spillover. So Ukrainians are leaving their country as refugees, right? Once a person leaves their country, they become a refugee. If they stay within their country, they're called an internally displaced person. It's a bit of a technicality, but it's important in terms of their status globally and how some of the responses and interventions are tailored. So, yeah, unfortunately, what I saw in Sudan, in Darfur, which is the western side of Sudan, was just a devastating level of violence. Sometimes it was labeled genocide, but certainly just a destruction, devastation it's very difficult to comprehend and also to kind of speak so that you can transcribe or offer the images. But I think what the similarities is that because these situations are so dire, a lot of decisions are made urgently and people need to flee. And they flee with almost nothing, clothes on their back, maybe a backpack, but they're leaving behind all their possessions, their family, their friends, what they know, and just stepping into a complete era of uncertainty. So it's very terrifying for them. And when you have the honor to be on the other side and to work with CRS, you're trying to ease that transition as much as you can. And CRS tries to provide that sort of intervention, that care holistically, so that these individuals can somehow get a semblance of what's next and to kind of provide a little bit of hope that there are people that do care for them.
And, this is probably a great moment to sort of talk about what we can do at the local level. Jen mentioned earlier that our own Bishop Sullivan, has been encouraging people who want to help out with regards to Ukraine to donate through CRS. So Jess, from your perspective as someone who's, been boots on the ground for a long time on the U.S. side, helping to get parishioners and people of good conscience to support CRS, how can people in the parishes do more?
Thanks, Mike. And Tom, I have to say, I am just constantly inspired. I'm so lucky to work with you. I mean that. Just the work that you've been involved in, the stories that you share. Thank you for that. It gets me even more motivated every time. So here in the U.S., I wanted to say I'm extra excited because Camden is a diocese that I work with as a community engagement manager. So excited to talk to you all and be with you all, particularly in the Diocese of Camden today. But here in the U.S., there's a lot of ways you can get involved. But I wanted to start with the idea of chapter building. CRS has a model where for parishes, high schools, we call them clubs, universities, we even have some young adults in workplaces. We have chapters over full diocese, things like that, where you can get together and you form a chapter. It's a group, it's an organization that you come together. We're going to provide all the training for you, all the resources as a CRS team. It's what Tom and I do on the daily. And where we ask you to get involved and to be that state voice, that mission and mobilization here in the U.S. So it's pretty simple. You get involved and we ask you to do two basic things as a chapter, two primary things, and that is advocacy and community giving. So once you find a group of people that's interested, you need about 4 or 5 to start. We have what's called an inviting team call, where somebody in Tom or I's role, if you're in Camden, it will be me. And we get together and we talk about what it means to be a chapter, what those advocacy and community action things are that we want you to get involved in. We train you, we work with you, we give you leadership skills, develop those skills that you already have, find your strengths. I know, Jen, you're a member of a great chapter in Trenton, so I can't wait to hear some of your input on that. And we train you, and then we set you off to spread the good word, to do the work of CRS right here on the ground in the U.S. So some of those advocacy actions, what we ask of you all to do is to be involved. CRS, we think, with the dignity of the human person, everything that Tom talked about, all those actions overseas, of course, we need funding for that and we need support behind that. So we ask people to do congressional visits, to write letters, to get involved and let your voice as U.S. Catholics and Friends of Good Faith here be heard through our government, so we can continue to support all the work that Tom shared and talked about. So we have monthly actions. We help you, we explain those, we support you in that. And we have those actions that we share with our chapters, and we ask you to get involved. Here in Camden and New Jersey as a state in general, we have many wonderful chapters and also just parishes and groups that are so involved in advocacy. An example would be right here at St. Maximilian Kolbe Parish in Morrell. They were super active and involved in the Global Child Thrive Act and helping get that passed. That's something that CRS worked tirelessly on. And that chapter at St. Maximilian Kolbe Parish, I cannot say enough about their commitment and their level of advocacy and involvement in getting that Global Child Thrive Act passed, which again continues to help CRS to do that work overseas and to work with particularly children, not only in nutritional development, but in mind and brain development. As Tom mentioned, meeting that whole person, meeting all the needs to continue with development. So that's an example of that. And then with community giving, as Tom mentioned, CRS is already on the ground. We're already there in many places working. So that enables us to be there. But, there's needs for funding. So how can we get involved here in the U.S.? You all mentioned Rice Bowl at the beginning. I know Camden is excellent with being involved in Rice Bowl, and that's so many of our gateways into CRS. I remember as a kid, I'd always be the first volunteer to get out of a science class to go count the Rice Bowl money. I loved it. There was who wants to count Rice Bowl money? My hand would shoot up. So we have, the Rice Bowl event, which is great and awesome, but there's more than that. So as a chapter, we ask you to take place in 2 community giving things. And one of those can be Rice Bowl, but it can be another thing. We had some parishes do cooking classes virtually, of course, over COVID times, where you paid for a ticket and you joined in on Zoom, and we had priests, we had deacons, we had parish members actually do cooking classes online to raise money for CRS as a community giving event. We have university students that get together and they have dinners and they cook particular meals from countries that CRS are in all over. And they come together, you charge a small fee for that, and that money goes to CRS. And community giving is important for CRS, not just as, okay, we need your money to supplement these programs through our grants and things like that. Often I want you to think if, you raise $100. All right. So Jen, you come and you say, Jess, I want to donate this $100. Now say CRS is applying for a grant through the government, and these numbers are way off, but they'll say, we'll give you $10,000 if you can supplement 100. So your fundraising, Jen, of $100 just provided CRS $100,000 because that fundraising was able to supplement a grant. So I always want to share that with people because I think some people think, Rice Bowl, I only, have $50. That $50 is so important, not just for our programs, but because it enables CRS to grow that money through grants and other programs to supplement what's going on. I don't know if that, makes sense, but I think it's so important to put that in perspective that your $500 can turn into $5 million through supplementing grant work. So again, chapters are great. They're so important. We have them on all levels. The adult traditional chapter, as I mentioned, high schools, we just had, I believe it was, I know we have 6 new chapters in our Northeast Mid-Atlantic region for high school. Sorry, I'm calling them chapters, clubs for our high school students. And we just had these high school students trained for advocacy visits. Most of these students can't even vote yet, but our staff, I have to give a shout out to them. They're so great. I was not a part of that, but I got to see what they did. And it was just phenomenal. Trained with these high school students, working with their advisors, and trained them how to have a visit with their Congress representatives and senators. And to me, that just blows my mind, because if these students, from the ages of 15 to 18 are already willing to make that change, already feeling that call, what are they going to be doing in college and beyond? And moving forward to college, our university chapters, again, that's probably my big passion coming from that and working with college students. It's just phenomenal. They are the immediate future of our church. Like they are, they're going to be coming out of their colleges, coming to our parishes. And I just think it's so phenomenal, the work these students are doing. I participated in a congressional advocacy visit with 2 of our students from a university up in New York. And I was blown away about the passion and the just the fervor they have for the dignity of the human person, and on all different topics. So working with these high school chapters, it is just, my mind is blown at how much these students want to apply what they're studying. I just worked with a young woman from Washington, D.C., Trinity College, sorry. And she's a biology major, and she wanted to learn about how CRS's work is like impacting medically, and then how we can make and advocate for that work to continue. So just to watch them put stuff together, I think is so inspiring. And, Tom mentioned that CRS is the best kept secret. And I think the university chapters are some of our best kept secrets, but I'm biased. Our adult chapters and high school clubs are phenomenal. And we're either going to be gathering our university students together this summer to train them and to practice for advocacy visits. So I love seeing what they're doing with their chapters, and I can't wait to see what they do, in their parishes moving forward. I think I touched a little bit on the process of starting a chapter, but if you're interested, my email address is going to be in the description of the podcast. I would love, if you want questions, I can send you information. We can have a chat. We can have a call. Just please reach out and email me. Again, the process is simple. We will train you. We will work with you. And we even have a come and see event coming up next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. We have a virtual event where we will have the opportunity for you to come into a Zoom call, ask questions, learn a little more. I'll be there, so I hope to see you there.
Yeah, that's April 26th and 27th.
Yeah, sorry,
right?
Thanks. I'm looking at my notes here, so I'm cheating. You're exactly right. April 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and Wednesday, April 27th at 4 p.m. And that is, even if you just want to know a little more, feel free to hop on to that. Jen, I don't want to take away, the chapter in Trenton does wonderful work. I know you're a big part of that. Did you have any examples or anything you wanted to share?
Well, it made me think about what you were talking about with chapters and also training. And you've mentioned training a couple of times. And I think it's important to note that explain a little bit about, so I'll just give my example of when I was with the Diocese of, when I was working with the Diocese of Trenton, we were contacted, if there would be any interest in creating a chapter. And like you said, it was a come and see. So there was no commitment. You come and see on those Zoom calls to see what it's about. Is it for you? And do you have the time for it? And to volunteer with it. And we did. And I'll say what was a very interesting experience. And the Trenton chapter is doing great. They had a whole bunch of series of videos up during Lent. I saw their Lenten videos for CRS. But I think what's important to note is that the Trenton chapter, the Diocese of Trenton is 4 counties, and that chapter is made up of somebody in every county. It's not based in one parish or one school or some of them are Catholic organizations. So there's somebody from every single county in there. So, and when we were on our first come and see meeting to see what this was going to all be about, it was actually St. Max Colby, a representative from them down here in Camden, who came on that call to explain what that is a parish chapter and explain their successes. And it was very uplifting, I think, for the entire Trenton team to hear that, to see, what they have accomplished. Because when you first come into that come and see meeting, and then you see, okay, so I think at the time there were 5 or 6 people on the Trenton chapter. It may have grown by now, but everybody can have a role, and then those trainings happen, because not everybody is good at writing a letter to the editor, or not everybody might be good at or comfortable with the idea of, let's contact our congressman because this is an issue that's important for the Catholic Church. But when there's 5 or 6 people in a group, everybody has a strength to bring. And then on top of that, CRS has been and is very dedicated to, well, let us help train you on how to write a letter to the editor. There will be a Zoom call on this date. Come and let us help you how to even contact your congressman to set up a time to sit and talk. And that was really important. And then, of course, as part of that, which one of my favorite parts, is that once a month you have your monthly calls where there's people on the call from all over the nation to first listen to, usually, I'm going to say a guest speaker, but usually it's somebody on the ground overseas or on the ground in Washington, or it has been congressmen. I've seen, congressmen come on to talk about, how they were affected by advocacy of CRS. And then after that national call, you break out into your breakout rooms to discuss. So there is a lot of ongoing training for these volunteers, and it's wonderful. And I think for anybody who might be looking to put their faith into action, this is a good try. Or come and see, like you said, come and see, and then hopefully it takes you see how much time you can give to it, and if that works for you. But one of our members in Trenton, I know for a fact, I had approached him. It was a friend of mine, because he had told me he was looking for something more. It was time for him to move out of one area that he was in to move into more of an action-based. And he's been in it for 2 years and he loves it. So, like you said, come and see. And you'll give them the training they need.
Jen,
excellent points.
I have to say that, Jen, she talks a lot. I work with her a lot. She talks a lot. But the what I've noticed is that she really lights up when she starts talking about her work with CRS in our beloved sister diocese of Trenton, and all the fine work that she did there. But it got me to thinking that one of the things we talked about a lot of the international stuff that there is to do. And we talked about what people can do on the local level. But CRS isn't just an international organization. There's actually work taking place nationally in our neck of the woods, actually related specifically to New Jersey, even the farm bill that CRS has been supporting. Jessica, can you kind of give us a little background on that? And maybe Tom could fill in as well.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm definitely going to be looking to Tom for this. He is by far an expert. But what I will say is we have coming up the Farm Bill 2023 reauthorization. And I would be thrilled. New Jersey is going to be a big, big part. They're going to be very important in getting that passed. So I would love, maybe you're not interested in becoming a chapter, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom here in a second to talk about the Farm Bill a little more. But if you're interested in learning more about how to advocate, how to write letters, maybe you're like, I can't do a chapter right now, Jess, but I'd love to get involved and help with this. Please feel free to reach out. We can provide some training, some information, and things like that. But to give you the actual background on the Farm Bill, I'm going to turn that to my colleague, Tom. So Tom,
Sure.
Take it away.
Yeah. One thing I'd just like to be really super clear about, Jen and Mike, and to the audience out there is, from my perspective, international foreign aid works. It is so important. The impact, the results are real and they're measured. And one of the greatest instruments that we have is the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is another element. I think that U.S. citizens should be very proud of this legislation because of the impact that it has on alleviating global hunger. So not only does it support domestic programs, but it's also an initiative that looks to support those who are struggling to meet their food requirements on a daily basis. 2.5 billion people are hungry in the world. This is where families have to make difficult choices and saying to a child, you eat on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so you got to take Tuesdays and Thursdays off. Or families that might have enough food to eat 8 months out of the year. And those other 4 months, they're scrounging. So the Farm Bill is a lifeline for CRS. It offers an opportunity to get to the scale and scope so that moving the needle on global hunger becomes a reality. You know, what's also, I think, a myth out there is that there's a silver bullet or a Hail Mary when it comes to some of these development problems. Hunger, malnutrition, clean water, that we were talking about earlier, Jen. Mm-hmm. These are not something that you can just solve overnight. Global hunger, I'm not an expert, but I've implemented many projects, fortunately, that have been funded through the Farm Bill, and they work, right? But it is a slow slog. You got to stick with it, steady and stable, and show that commitment. So the Farm Bill is incredibly important. It positions the United States as a leader overseas. It generates so much goodwill in the developing world, especially in Africa. It provides resources that allow communities, families, individuals to step out of this worrisome environment of how not only am I going to fill my bellies for my children, but also to get that nutritional value so that children aren't stunted. And so the Farm Bill is up for reauthorization. It does so much from food for education to agricultural livelihood projects. It helps mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. So it improves natural resource management and things go on and on. So there are many fantastic elements of the Farm Bill. But I think it's important for everyone to know that this is a piece of legislation that works, and it's something that we should all get behind.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if this is part of that, so if I'm wrong, just let me know. But okay. I remember during COVID, especially when the schools were closed, and I'm going to be speaking on Catholic schools here specifically, but, you know, a lot of certain foods were given to those schools based on government funds that were already allocated. And if it hadn't been for that, I mean, parents were going to schools, even though it was virtual, to go pick up meals to bring home because they didn't have the money to put that food on the table themselves. So they were still provided school lunches. Is this in any way part of that? Like I said, I could be wrong. That just piqued my interest when you said that.
Yeah, I don't know about that specific example. I know several domestic programs are supported and funded by the Farm Bill. Jess, I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that.
I do. The McGovern-Dole Food for Education, Jen, is I think what you're referring to. And it was, in my limited understanding, please, I'm no expert, was a part of that with the COVID-19. So the Farm Bill, as you mentioned, like it's so important globally with CRS, but it does have some local impacts as well. That's part of this bigger bill, is my understanding.
Okay. I just remember how important that was to parent and families, because at the time, like I said, school was virtual, but they would go to the schools to still pick up the lunches they would be provided. And if there was more, they would also be allowed to take home a lunch to their sibling under 18. So it was a real lifesaver during that time. So, but just another example of why we should be paying attention to this nationally and in our own backyard.
And I have to say, Jen, what you just did there to me was such a great example. When we train and talk about advocacy visits, it's so important to have a story and a purpose behind that. And what you just did right there is something we encourage, the people we're training for those advocacy visits to share how you've been touched and why this is important to you. So even if you don't have a personal story, we'll train you and, give you an example for that. But I just wanted to highlight that I think that was such a great example of how you made that personal and impactful and why it's important to you. So just to keep that in mind when we're advocating, sometimes we think it's so hard. And until I was trained by CRS back in 2018, as an advisor, I was so worried. But what you did just touched me. And that's what we encourage our folks to do when we're talking to others and talking to Congress, make that personal. And CRS, I feel, does a great job of that.
Yeah, and I don't think, like what we've been saying, you don't have to travel overseas to be engaged with CRS, right? There are a lot of things, and through the chapter, it's that fluidity, it's that consistent relationship with CRS. But simply put, like what Jess is saying, is just imagine families in the developing world. I mean, I consider the fact that I live in the U.S. and American citizen, like I hit the lottery, right? I could have been born into a situation of inextricable poverty. But just imagine that your family, you're a parent, you're a mom, a dad, whatever, and you have to say to your child, you got to skip a meal today. Today you don't eat. I mean, that is absolutely heart-wrenching. And to know that you're setting your child back by doing that, those are decisions that these families have to wrestle with every day. Yeah. So, I mean, I think at a very common level, right, with our Catholic foundation is to say, that's not right. It shouldn't be like that, especially when a problem is solvable. I don't know. It gets me kind of fired up, honestly.
Me too.
I think we already have such a strong faith community, and there are so many calls to action in the Catholic Church, but CRS just really speaks to, I think, my heart. And in talking to Jen and Tom, how can we take that community of faith and that faith and be called to action? And not just action here in the States, but action, worldwide. How can we live and act in solidarity? And CRS really provides that and inspires that in me, and luckily we get to see it in so many others working.
Awesome. Well, Mike, at the beginning of the podcast you said that you were looking forward to learning more about CRS. Do you feel like you've learned more today about CRS?
I have, actually, and it was one of the holes in my game was that I didn't have a lot of interaction with CRS. I did a lot with Catholic Charities. As we know, we represent them a lot on this podcast. We certainly talked about the work they do in their deployments nationally, particularly out of our office in Camden. But the international work of CRS is just something that we haven't had a chance to talk about. But Jessica, from your perspective, and Jen, yours as well, as someone who's participated, I love the fact that there's such engagement going on with CRS encouraging people, in the community to become a greater part of this. And let's face it, the learning how to advocate properly is something that you'll find useful, not just for international work, which is certainly important and necessary, but also something you'll be able to utilize in your personal life, in your community life for all sorts of projects. And to something that Jess said earlier, it is something that oftentimes people feel like they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to get started. There's certainly a level of shyness that comes with it from time to time. And sometimes it can feel like it's too much or you don't have a valid point. That's the beauty of being a U.S. citizen, is it's ingrained in us. We are all allowed to go out and talk and, make our voices heard in ways that can make a real change. So I do hope people will realize that even that this is, in addition to the great work that can be done, it's a great personal education process, which, as you know, Jen, I'm big into. It's like we can keep learning until they finally put us in the ground. But I'm also impressed, Jen, with not many reporters and journalists take it upon themselves to become personally invested in stories like this. We are known for usually sitting on the sidelines and acting as watchers, not so much acting as invested persons. And the fact that you were able to sort of get past that and, become part of a CRS group when you were in Trenton more frequently, that's great.
Well, is it as like I said, it's a great team, and what
is it as rewarding as you make it sound?
It's even more rewarding than I make it sound, which is why I encourage anybody who is interested in coming to that, or tuning into that Come and See event, to please, on April 26 or April 27, consider registering for those information sessions. And if you need more information, Jessica, can I give your email address out too?
Yes, please.
Okay, so jessica.morrell@crs.org. That's 2 S's, 2 R's, 2 L's, and we'll put it in the link. We'll put it in the link, so check it out.
Yeah, we will have all the information in the show notes so that people can find out more if you didn't have a piece of paper handy as we were talking just now. But no, this was great. So Tom and Jess, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Awesome to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for your support and interest in CRS. Happy to be back and support any way that we can. So please let us know.
Yes, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you and seeing some of you at our Come and See event. Come be a part of our big community.
That's awesome. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. And to our listeners, we'll talk to you again next week. See you, everybody.